Hello and welcome to the Business of Data show. On this week's episode, we'll be talking all about creating high-performance data and analytics teams. Hello there, my name is Catherine and I'm the Content and Community Manager here within the Business of Data team at Corinium, and it's a pleasure to have you joining us today. Driven by our global connected network, Corinium inspires data analytics senior leaders to drive efficiency and innovation and follow proven paths to success. The Business of Data show is just one of the many formats that we use to showcase thought-leading insights and senior data analytics executives. In each episode, we'll discuss the latest industry news and research and explore the hottest topics, challenges and opportunities. On that note, we'd love to hear from you. If you have thoughts, questions or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please do email them over to the bod@coriniumgroup.com. Now, with all of that said and done, shall we dive into today's episode? Today, we are centering our discussion around creating high-performance data and analytics teams. As we know, there are several key ingredients that go into high-performing data and analytics teams. We've all heard the phrases cross-functional collaboration, microservice architecture, and agile product development. But what does this actually look like in practice? This episode, we ask, how are data analytics leaders improving business stakeholders in data product development process? How are they ensuring new capabilities are delivered to end users quickly? And what feedback processes have they put in place to help them respond to changing business priorities? Our first thought leader joining me in the studio today, all the way from sunny South Africa, is Maritza, who is the head of data for RCS Group. Now, I'm so glad we're chatting with Maritza today, as she has worked within a plethora of roles and teams, including ETL development, BI project management, BI business analysis, dimensional modeling and data governance as well. Hi Maritza, how are you doing today?
Catherine, I'm doing fantastic and thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for giving us some of your time today. I'm so glad I've got you on to talk about this topic. I know it's a passion area of yours, and I know you're a huge advocate for having a strong relationship with the business, and I'd love to know more about how in reality you actually go about that and involving the business stakeholders in the data product development process.
Yes, Catherine, I am indeed an advocate for data office and business co-creation. And the reason is that we don't deliver data and analytics products in isolation. We deliver within our organizational ecosystems with interdependencies between teams. And often the data office is kind of at the end of the data value chain.
Yep.
So it's very important that you involve your stakeholders throughout that value chain and right from the start. And, the other reason is that data programs and data initiatives, more often than not, actually drives data transformation and also endeavors to create a data culture in our organizations. So if you think about transformation and culture, that's all about people.
Yeah.
So it's so important that we take people on the journey with us. And how we do this is actually really straightforward. And it's just including our stakeholders, whether it is IT or HR or business teams, right from the start and in every single data process. And I really don't think there are any holy cows when it comes to co-creation. And, include the business in technology selection, in, even processes or capabilities that would traditionally have been classified as IT capabilities.
Absolutely.
For example, at one of my previous companies that I worked for, we even included the business in dimensional modeling.
Oh, wow.
And Yeah, and by including the business in solution design, you're actually getting a far better data product at the end of the day.
Mm.
And also, that particular project was quite difficult. And by having that business buy-in and collaboration right from the start, it actually helped us to overcome some of the challenges that we had in that project. But speaking of challenges, everything could have a dark side, even
Mm.
something as virtuous as data office and business co-creation. And one of the very painful lessons that I've learned in my career is that you've got to be very clear about responsibilities and ownership
Yeah.
when you are collaborating or co-creating with other teams, because it's very likely that you could have a situation where you have a conflict of interest.
Yep.
So making sure right from the start what decision rights every single stakeholder and every
Mm-hmm.
participant in your process have, really important. For example, the lesson that I learned, the very painful lesson that I learned a few years ago, was when we started our self-service BI project at one of the companies that I worked for.
Mm-hmm.
And we started off with a technology a BI tool evaluation. And it was very important to me that we actually include the business in the whole process, because after all, they will be the people who actually use this tool. So
Mm-hmm.
it was important that they, selected the BI tool that was closest to the way that they wanted to work. What I didn't take into consideration is what would happen if we get to the end of this process and there wasn't consensus
Yeah.
on the BI tool. And that's exactly what happened. So if I could do a do-over of that, I would have agreed with the business right at the start of this process who could make the final decision. So
Right. Yeah.
where does the buck stop? And that could be the CDO or the CEO or the CIO. But someone needs to take up that
Mm.
responsibility of making the final decision. So
Absolutely.
ownership, clear responsibilities, but still take people on the journey with you,
Yeah.
because data strategies are certainly all about people.
Absolutely. And I mean, Maritza, you and I have spoken enough to know that I love it when we talk about missteps and learnings, because I feel so many in the audience will appreciate that honesty and really learn from it as well. Um, but you say that the business has to be on this journey with the data analytics teams. But how do you keep them entertained throughout it all? Because I can imagine they're very excited about the end product, but may not necessarily be bought into that process. So how do you keep them involved and engaged to a level that's actually helpful?
Catherine, I would say that you need a very well thought through data governance framework
Mm.
and operating model. So different people at different levels of decision making getting involved at different levels of the process. So, for example, you should have a data steering committee. That's an executive committee that includes the CEO and some or all of your executives, who's basically the highest authority for data and analytics in your
Yeah.
organization. And their purpose is to make decisions around strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And then at a more sort of tactical level, you should have a forum with sort of more heads of departments or heads of divisions. And these are people who make decisions sort of more around data quality strategy
Yep.
and, how do we roll out data management, data governance, or even data initiatives within the organization. And then at an operational level, you want sort of more regular um, engagements with
Mm-hmm.
your data stewards in the business, but also just ordinary people. around things like data ethics and model governance, etc. So very important that you understand who should make decisions at what level. Because, an executive data steerco, they're not going to be interested in making decisions around what are the topics that the next model governance forum should look at. And we can't expect the model governance forum to decide on strategy. So that is how you keep different stakeholders interested, by making sure that they have input into the decisions that concern them.
Absolutely. Now, Maritza, before I let you go today, I did want to ask you, I mentioned it in the intro to this episode, what role do you see methodologies like Agile and microservice architectures playing in the future of data?
Catherine, I think it's going to be an absolutely critical role. In fact, if you don't have data ops as a very important component of your data strategy, I would suggest you go back to the drawing board and think about that.
Okay.
Because there's absolutely no tolerance, no appetite for long delivery cycles in data and analytics anymore. So when you think about and when you put your data strategy together, make sure that your data architecture supports continuous delivery and agile analytics lifecycle, as well as agile data governance. Please don't forget about that. If we're going to modernize our environments, if we're going to implement data ops, we also have to modernize data governance.
Perfect. Maritza, thank you so much for joining me today. I will catch up with you soon for sure.
Thanks, Catherine.
There we go. Now, just a reminder, if you are enjoying the Business of Data show, do be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Business of Data platform for even more thought-leading content. Now, earlier this week, I was lucky enough to catch up with another thought leader to add their thoughts into this discussion. Check this out. Hello, Ben. Thank you so much for joining me ahead of this week's Business of Data show episode. It's so great to carve some time out with you.
Hi, Katrina. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
Super. Now, when it comes to transformation of any kind, there often needs to be a transformation of culture within an organisation. And I wanted to know from you, what has been your experience in digital transformation and handling that culture shift within EasyJet?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. There's always a need for a transformation of the culture. And I found this especially true kind of when you're working in a large company, especially ones that have been here for a while. Because they're not digital natives, and in particular, data used to be considered more of a byproduct that had no value and was almost a throwaway. And now we have this digital and AI revolution coming up, and suddenly all companies are forced to consider data as a key asset. And that's kind of like a change in mindset. And you can put in all the technology and process that you need to kind of access that data and make it work. But that mindset, if it's still not there, you'll miss the data that's important, and you won't use it in the right way. So culture change is a really important part, but it's also the hardest thing to achieve. Which I've found, especially in these large companies that have been here for a while. And I was really lucky actually when I took my first job on at Unilever as a research scientist. I was a mathematical modeler, and I worked with some behavior change psychologists, and we were building behavior change systems, which is really interesting. And I learned a lot about, how do you change people's behavior and culture and the way they think. And I learned the big lesson I learned is it's a journey, and you have to think of it as a journey. You can't expect the company to change their culture overnight. So you have to plan for that journey and take them on that journey so that they get from A to B. And that's if you want it to stick, because you can do stuff that, you change them for one day and then they go back to their old ways. So if you want it to stick, it's a journey. And one of the things I have realized is the higher the senior stakeholders that are supportive, the easier it is to change. And I'm very lucky at EasyJet. The CEO Johan is my biggest supporter, so that that cascades down and makes everything easier to actually happen. But even then, in some companies, I've had really senior stakeholder support, but then the grassroots kind of not wanting to budge. So what I've always tried to do is start with what I call the cheerleaders. These are those early adopters who would kind of jump on your new techniques, the data analytics and modeling, and they'll start showing value with you. They'll collaborate with you to show value. And once you start building that momentum, then others start coming to you because these guys, cheerleaders, are doing really well because you're supporting them with data, and they want a piece of it as well. So then you start building momentum that way. And you can build stuff like that. One interesting thing this year, what I've seen, is this pandemic suddenly hitting, and I didn't realize that a crisis can actually change the culture overnight. And I've seen an amazing shift, like not overnight, but over a couple of months or so. It's gone from trying to sell the value of data to suddenly having to accelerate everything because everybody's suddenly asking for data because, all the old rule-based systems, all the gut feel, it's not working anymore. They need the data to drive stuff. So they're all coming suddenly, and you've got to suddenly change your approach because, you're not trying to sell it anymore. You have to try and do as much as you can. So that was an interesting thing. A good crisis can change culture overnight, but otherwise it's a long journey, and you have to start small and accelerate when you get momentum.
Absolutely. I've got two follow-up questions from that answer then, Ben. It's firstly, as you say, your approach to this is more of a journey type aspect, and the fact do you have to take the executives and the wider business on that journey with you. And as you say, normally you can't snap your fingers and just get a transformational buy-in from a culture. So my first follow-on question is, what would be your advice to a data leader who's perhaps just stepped into the role, joined a new company, and they know they need to do that culture work? How did you go about identifying those key cheerleaders? Obviously, having your CEO buy-in is just fantastic, but not everyone's going to have that. So how do you go about identifying those cheerleaders who are going to be really, really valuable to you? And then second, that transformation that you've gone under with the pandemic, where, I think back to 2019, with very much talking about how to convince people to be data driven, and now the conversation has shifted to how do you deal with the demand in everyone wanting everything and actually making sure that people want the most valuable things to them. I think there's that temptation to just want everything, and actually that can become quite overwhelming and not always the most valuable thing. So how do you go about managing that demand in the digital sense as well, the infrastructure is set up to do that? So the first being, how do you identify those cheerleaders, and the second being, how do you manage it when you've got them and they're really excited?
So those are very good questions, and the first one is very important, especially for data people, especially people like me who come up as a data scientist and become a data leader, because one of the important things to do is you have to listen and you have to put yourself in other people's shoes. So one of the first things I did when I joined EasyJet, I went around the company meeting as many people as I could. So you meet your peers first, across the functions, and then they, depending on how they react to your questions and how they explain how things are working in the company, then you go to their team levels. And the idea is to kind of find the people when you're talking to them. You start the conversation not trying to sell data, but trying to understand their function and how stuff works and what are their pain points. And as soon as they start talking about their pain points and you see an opportunity where data can make a difference, then you start that conversation about, oh, what if we did this with this data? Would that make a difference for your function? And suddenly, if you could do something simple, especially the easy, quick win ones, you talk about those first. You say, oh, but what if I got this data and did this model and you could do this? And you can see their eyes lighten up and there's like, wow, okay, brilliant. Can I have that tomorrow? Kind of thing. Those are the cheerleaders. And there'll be other people who, you're talking to them and you really feel like they're entrenched in gut feel, and they think, what's this data stuff? What do you guys do, kind of thing. And so you gotta listen, talk to as many people as you can, and try to understand their pain points and find those quick wins that you can deliver through data, because that's what then creates those cheerleaders, and then they kind of talk to others about you, and that spreads the word and brings the people to you. Yeah, when you have the opposite problem of everybody coming to you, that's the other side of the coin, I guess. And prioritization is key, and that's where then you have to really stop and say, no, we can't do all of this. We need goals. What's our immediate goals, our 2 to 3 year, 5 year plan? And that's another thing I'm lucky with at EasyJet is we have a really clear plan about how we need to get through this pandemic and what we're building for after that. So that allows you to then prioritize, and then everything that comes into the pot, you can say, okay, let's prioritize. And the other thing I've learned is that prioritization has to be a collaborative thing. So the business have to say, this is the priority from the business side, and then what you bring is the feasibility aspect. So even though this thing is the highest probability, the highest impact thing that we could do, it may not be possible from a data perspective. You don't have the data, or it's not good enough. And so then you collaboratively prioritize, and then you start landing the big things. And that's how I've been approaching it.
Super. I mean, that is something that we hear fairly regularly now, is that actually we can't be in isolation. We can't be in silos thinking the business and data. It's got to be a merged approach. And actually, it's really interesting that you say about the priorities there, and that they have to be bought into that they may want everything, but you have to say, right, well, let's target, let's set some goals, but they have to believe in those goals as well. And I think what you said there at the top of your answer about managing that passion as well is certainly of interest to many data folks. And actually those quick wins are probably quite easy to get that initial buy-in, and then you can set those larger goals that are going to make the real big impact to the business once you've got those, as you say, those wide eyes and smiley faces from the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, indeed. And those quick wins, you also have to be careful about different companies. The quick wins are different because it might seem easy to do, but within a company, the constraint of the technology or the business function, how it works, you might not be able to do some stuff. So that's why you got to always be thinking about, this is a new company. These I need to understand the function, how the business works, what's the landscape of technology, so that I can then figure out, okay, this may be easy model to build, but they don't have the data, or they can't implement it, they can't deploy it. So that's important as well.
Absolutely, that immersive work, getting yourself into the company, and then checking the pulse on the culture, checking the pulse on the literacy, as you say, the data quality. What data do you have? What data do you not have? And just understanding that environment first before getting going. A real takeaway from this conversation for me, for certain. Ben, as always, it's so lovely catching up with you. Thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
There we go. These episodes sure do go quick. What I really found of interest from that is specifically what Maritza said there about having the business alongside the data teams from the beginning, but clearly setting out those boundaries for where the buck stops. I think that was particularly of interest for me. Thank you again to our thought leaders for their fantastic contributions. Now, next time we'll be talking all about data ethics. Now, just as we've done this time, we'll be joined by expert thought leaders to help us dive deep into the challenges and opportunities. Now, be sure to subscribe to the Business of Data YouTube channel, follow our page on LinkedIn, and of course, come and visit us over at the Business of Data platform for more great content, insights, and connections. As always, stay safe, stay well, and we'll see you next time.